Welcome back to the channel, folks. I'm Vulkan, and today I have a special video for you guys. We're diving headfirst into the PC client for Torchlight Infinite. Now, I also wanted to give a big shout out and a thank you to XD Games for providing me with a key and early access to this version of the game. And as you all know, I've been super excited for Torchlight Infinite. I've covered some of the previous betas with videos showing like how the game works. I showed off a deep dive into the build process for Gemma, the Frostfire, but that was all for the mobile version. And I know some of you have been anxiously awaiting the PC version, so let's get started. So to cut to the chase, the PC client for Torchlight Infinite works well. I haven't had any performance issues or crashes, and the PC-specific UI really helps give this client its own identity rather than what we saw with Diablo Immortal, where they just scaled up the same mobile UI, but it was truly the same thing. But I'm not going to lie to you guys, there are some minor issues with text sizing, translation, and some missing settings, but I did get confirmation from the developers that they are working on all of these things and they should be resolved by the time open beta gets here. Now first, I want to start with the world, the online aspect, and the story. Of course, no spoilers, but we'll still cover it a little bit. So the story of Torchlight Infinite takes place 200 years after Torchlight 2 ended and is in no way associated or linked to Torchlight 3. Even the studio behind this game is completely different than the one we saw for that game. So the main campaign will take players through a variety of landscapes and player hubs, all while they chase the Spark, which in the wrong hands can unleash unimaginable destruction. Now, I'm not going to go any deeper than that, but let's just say the Spark creates some pretty interesting problems that you have to go solve. Overall, I've really enjoyed my time with the story so far, and it's typical of action RPGs, right? The cutscenes are decent, the storyline is about what you'd expect from any action RPG on the market. It's not going to challenge The Last of Us or anything like that, but it's enough to keep me interested and engaged. But there was something else that I mentioned in there, and that's player hubs. So Torchlight Infinite is a shared world game, meaning you will see other players online in the hub and be able to view their profile, add them as friends, or party up and tackle the game together. Now, I'm not sure how many players are fit into a single instance of a hub, but there were enough that things felt lively, and honestly, I really liked it. It's nice to see. I'm a big fan of online games, so it's nice to see other players kind of occupying the hub as well. Now, they even added a trade house to help facilitate trading between players, so you don't need any third-party website. Instead, if you have some items that you don't need but you want to sell, you can go talk to the trade house NPC, put them out there, and sell them, which is great. But let's talk about the gameplay itself. Torchlight Infinite is lots of fun to play. I had access to a slew of high-level end-game characters to get a taste of how each hero performs and what builds we might see around the world. I had access to a dual dagger build, which was very reminiscent of a Diablo 3 monk. There were tons of clone strikes. I had an erosion-based caster who decayed everything it touched, and there were tons more. Now, while all these were super great, right? It's so much fun just to kind of come into level 95 character, fully kitted out, and you're tackling the hardest end-game maps there are, which, by the way, end-game maps are pretty similar to what Path of Exile has, which is great. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But as good as that is, I would much rather build my character from scratch and then find skills that I like and then prop them up with support skills and passives. Now, I've talked about it before, but Torchlight Infinite has a great skill system. It reminds me a lot of Path of Exile. You have tons of different skills. You have support gems. You can link all of these together on pieces of gear, except this time around, the skills in Torchlight Infinite aren't attached to gear. Instead, they live within their own menu in the UI. So the process goes a little bit like this. You unlock a skill, you equip it, and then as you level up and you find new gear that gives you energy, you can unlock up to 5 support slots for that skill. And these supports will augment how that skill will perform, sort of like how a 6th link works in Path of Exile. And these range from basic ones like just adding extra fire damage to others that'll grant extra effects or buffs whenever a skill is used. So overall, I mean, the skill system is one of the primary things that initially drew me into Torchlight Infinite, and it's still one of my favorite parts of the game. And now the closed beta is out and I've been able to talk to more people about it. Everyone talks about how much they love this skill system and how easy and approachable it is, which again, I like. It's one of those things where it gives you the depth of Path of Exile, but you don't have the RNG on top of RNG that goes into it. So to me, the build diversity is going to be really great, and there will be a meta. Obviously, everything always comes down to a meta, but each player can stray as far from that as they want to try something new. So next I want to talk about the heroes. So in previous versions, we only had access to one specialization for each hero, but we could see that there were more. Well, during my time with this particular version, I was able to play with some of the other specializations for a few of the heroes. So for instance, Yuga, who's the Time Witness, comes with the space-time illusion, right? We've talked about this one before. He creates a clone of himself and it'll kind of mimic what you're doing. But there was another one called Space-Time Elapse. Now this one I really liked. So it cranked up the damage of all of your ailments and your damage over time effects, which made it perfect for an Affliction style build, which I absolutely love to play. Now, I'm not sure if these are going to be available by default when you're choosing your character, or if these are unlocked later in the game, but all I know is I just had access to them for this test, right? Either way, these brought some extra flavor to picking a hero and choosing what type of build that you want to go with. So lastly, one of the pain points I brought up during the closed beta was the fact that legendary gear felt boring and stale. Like they were just stat sticks, and I will 100% double down on that. In the previous betas, legendary gear truly felt like all it brought was stats. It wasn't exciting. But this time around, they've made some pretty big adjustments. Legendary gear feels a bit more engaging and build enabling. Now, I'm not going to say build defining because I don't want you all to think of like Diablo 3 gear sets, but rather you can find a good legendary that can help amp up the build that you're going for. And it was a very, very welcomed change. For instance, let's go back to that dual dagger build where I was talking about all the different kind of shadow clones that attack whenever you perform an attack. Well, by default, you only have 2 shadow clones, but there's a pair of daggers, legendary daggers, that you can get that'll add additional shadow clones. But this is a good example of what legendaries can do. It doesn't take your build and completely change it into something different, but what it does is take your original idea and go, hey, you know what? What if we add 6 more phantoms to that? What if instead of 2, you have 8? And what if instead of every 5 seconds they proc, what if they proc every single time that you attack? And it's stuff like that that really kind of pulls me into an action RPG. So I'm glad that Torchlight Infinite went that direction. Now, to keep on the topic of gear, they also have built-in filters that are set to basic, intermediate, and advanced. And these will help guide players through the game and filter out sort of all the riffraff and only focus on things that may be an upgrade for you. Now, you can't create a filter on your own, right? You can't create your own one in the game. This is just something that they put in there. So don't go in thinking, okay, this is like Grim Dawn, or this is going to be like the Path of Exile filters where I can go and I can make all these little adjustments and truly make it my own. That's not what's there. Hopefully there will be in the future, but for now, there are some just pre-made ones that you have to choose between. But before we get into some of the issues I ran into, I wanted to cover one last thing, and that's the seasonal content that Torchlight Infinite will be receiving. So one, yes, Torchlight Infinite will be getting seasons, and while we don't know the cadence or the scope of how small or large these will be, all we do know is that they are coming. There will be kind of rotational content coming to the game. Right now, they do have their first season going. It's called Dark Surge. It's a pretty simple mechanic and unlocks a little ways into the story, but essentially this allows you to fill a gauge, and then once that gauge is full, you can click it to summon a horde of enemies and elites to fight. And these mobs will become even more and more and more powerful every time you refill the gauge on a single map. So this sort of incentivizes you to clear the full map because these have a higher chance at dropping good gear. So you don't want to just blow through it and ignore it completely because you're going to be shorting yourself on actually getting some decent drops. Now, if you do manage to clear all of them out, like I said, you are rewarded with some great gear. Sometimes even a mysterious vendor will show up, and this vendor will allow you to corrode your items in exchange for a chance at a powerful trait. For instance, you could add additional projectiles to a certain skill. You can make a skill free to cast. These are all things that you can get talking to that vendor, and it's a pretty fun gamble. You can take a piece of gear, offer it up for corrosion, and then you basically spin a wheel, and whatever modifier it lands on is what happens. For example, there's one that adds a new affix to your item. Sometimes, like I said, these are very powerful. Other times, they're extremely basic, and they can really ruin an item, or they can supercharge it and proc it up. Then you have another one that re-rolls all of your affixes, and there are others that have a variety of different effects. Now, of course, you don't have to do this if you don't want to, right? I enjoyed the little flavor that it adds to the season, but you can completely ignore it. Now, as I got deeper into the game and I sort of had an established build and I liked where my gear was at, then I ignored the vendor and I said, you know what, I really don't want to throw a wrench in this because it's really working for me. But if I got an additional drop that might work well for a different build I wanted, or maybe a different character I wanted, then I would talk to the vendor and I would see if I could roll something that was useful for me. Okay, so let's talk about issues. Now, most of these are personal preference. Overall, the game has ran great. I've been having a great time. I haven't had any issues with bugs or skills not working or crashes. Honestly, I'm very impressed at how well it's working, for especially being a game that went from mobile to PC. So it's really solid for a beta. Anyway, let's get into some of the issues. The largest issue I ran into was the text sizing and the missing text for some of the tooltips. If we take a look at skills, we can see that some of the text will run off of the skill box, while other text dominates the entire skill image. Now, while this isn't hurting anything, and honestly, it does make finding skills a bit easier, it is not aesthetically pleasing. And I know this is super nitpicky, but from a visual standpoint, people are going to see this and may immediately write it off as a bad port. So hopefully this is fixed ahead of launch, because that is an issue. People will see it and go, you know what? They didn't even put any thought, any effort into adjusting the UI, adjusting the text, the sizing, any of that stuff. And because of that, I'm not even going to try it. Now, the other issue I ran into was the lack of control customization. I really wanted to change my interact key from D to F, and I noticed there was not a way to do that. There was not a way to customize any of your controls. So hopefully that comes later, but for now, you really just have to use whatever they give you. So kind of have to hope it works. Now, the last thing is the minimap overlay. If you're like me, you love having your minimap up and going while you're working through a level, right? You like having it up, you like running around and seeing where you're going. It's an old habit from action RPGs, and unfortunately, Torchlight does not allow you to do that. You can open an overlay, kind of expand the map, but you can't move while it's open. It's really just there as a reference point of, oh, I need to go left or I need to go right. So again, hoping this is fixed for all the ARPG fans out there, but for now, if you're hoping to have the overlay up while you're running around, that is something that will not be available. So my final thoughts on the game are pretty positive. I've had a really good time exploring each character, trying out different builds, clearing the story, working through all the end game content, which I'll talk about later in a different video since it is pretty intricate. Imagine Path of Exile maps, but there's a big twist, a typical Torchlight twist they put on it. Now, because this is a beta and things are subject to change, take everything that I've covered in here with a grain of salt. This isn't a review because this is not the final product. This is truly just a how are things going from Vulkan. But if you are an action RPG fan and you want to return to the world of Torchlight, this is a good step back into the franchise. So if any of this at all looks interesting to you, then you can support me and join the closed beta test now on Torchlight Infinite. You can find the closed beta test from the link in the description below. Now, the beta test itself lasts for 2 weeks. You can also go out and pre-register so you won't miss the game going live in October. So get out there, explore, and enjoy. And if you want more Torchlight content, please consider subscribing. Thank you so much for watching. This has been Vulkan, and I'll talk to you guys next time.